Hi guys, let's look at our watercolor technique sampler. Our objective is we're going to create a watercolor sampler page showing at least 9 different techniques, and you can arrange them however you want on your paper. And sorry if there's like a party going on behind me in that classroom, so if there's cheering, that's what you're hearing. They're not cheering for me, unfortunately. So our first technique is a flat wash. So we're going to be applying an even amount of color over an area to create a block of color. So this is probably, I think, one of the hardest things to do in watercolor because you're trying to keep it the same value across, but what's happening is the paper is absorbing and resisting the pigment, and where you leave your brush like this, it leaves like a blob of water, right? So you have to play around with how much water you're adding to your watercolor, and then what I do is I kind of just go back and forth, kind of dispersing that pigment across the paper. And you'll also notice I'm using tube watercolor up there. We'll probably be using the cake watercolor. It's the same thing. Just wet the little tray or little pan or whatever color you're using, and you can use some palette paper to kind of mix it if you'd like. But it's the same thing, just a different type of watercolor. So you can see I'm kind of pulling that back and forth. So I'm trying to keep it as even as I can. So I would try to do this a few times just to try to get the hang of it. And you can see where I stop, where I let go of that brush, it like pulls. So I'm just kind of trying to pull that back and forth. A cheater technique also is you take a little bit of tissue paper and you can drop it in there and like kind of absorb some of the extra water. So next is a gradient wash. So a gradient wash is where we're creating a wash that fades from darker to light. So think of like a value scale. So I think this is a little bit easier because of the nature of watercolor, like it's going to run out of pigment as you go across. So what I like to do is do my little stripe, and then I put more water on my brush and I just pull it. So the further out I get, the less pigmented my brush has, less pigment my brush has. So I'm kind of like fading it out, and then I kind of just pull it. So there's a lot of ways to do these things. If you don't like my way, you can always Google somebody else's. And then I'll go back and I'll add a little bit of more pigment in there to make it darker if I want. Just do your best and keep practicing. Alright, next technique. A dry brush. So dry brush is exactly what it sounds like. So you're going to put paint onto dry paper. You're not going to add a lot of water to your watercolor because you want it pretty dry so it's almost like pen ink. And with this is where you would do details or any kind of really dark areas that you were trying to do. So you would do a dry brush over the top. The next technique is wet on wet. So it's kind of what it sounds like. You're going to wet your paper first, just clear water. So that paper is going to be absorbing that water, and then you're going to be dropping in your pigment, and then it almost will look like tie-dye, little explosions. It's really cool. It's really abstract. And then you can also drop in a second color. So think about colors that mix well together. So blue and red make violet. And then that's a good way to make clouds, to make abstract backgrounds. And then you just kind of let the paint do what it wants to. So that is wet on wet. Next is glazing. So glazing is where you have that washed color. It is dry. And then you're going to apply a wash of a different color over the top. So remember, red and blue makes violet. So I have red, I can do a wash of blue over the top, and where those colors overlap, it can make a violet. So some artists will paint black and white, completely monochrome, and then glaze over the top, yellow, blue, red to make the colors. So a little bit more advanced, but a lot of artists use glazing, not just in watercolor, in oil and acrylic too. Next technique is rubbing alcohol. So you're like, why are we using rubbing alcohol? Well, when you drop rubbing alcohol onto wet paint, so it has to be wet, it's going to create this blotted texture since it's drying the paint faster than the surrounding areas. And in this one I have a little spray. So I have a little can. I don't know if I'll have those right now, but you can just take a little drop, little Q-tip, drop it in there. And it makes like a splotchy texture, so it's just a way to create texture. Next is salt. Salt is another way to create texture. Again, it's drying out areas of the paint faster than others where the salt's hitting. And with salt, it makes like a little spotty kind of texture. And you just want to sprinkle a little bit. Don't get crazy with it. That's a little bit crazy. Look, I'm doing a little crazy right there. And then once it's dry, you just kind of wipe it off and it'll have this little spotty texture to it. Alright, then is blotting. So you can do blotting with a lot of different things. So you can dab wet paint with a sponge and it'll make like a sponge texture. You can dab it with a paper towel. Those ones we have at school, those brown useless ones, have like a circle-y texture in there. You can blot it and it will make a circle texture. You can put plastic wrap on top and let it sit and it will make this like really cool like line type of texture. So there's lots of different things you can do for blotting to create texture in your work. Then is masking. So masking, you're using something to block the paint. So tape, so think when you use painter's tape to paint your room. So you're going to put tape. There's also a special watercolor like masking fluid, which is like this white kind of rubbery stuff, kind of like rubber cement that you can put down. And it preserves the white areas of the paper. So if I'm doing like a landscape and I just want to focus on the land and not get any color into the sky, I would mask it with tape, like make a line so I could paint my landscape and still have a nice crisp line where my sky is going to be. And then I can go do the same thing and cover my landscape that I painted and do the sky without the colors touching. Because with watercolor, you start painting on top, it's going to reactivate the paint and it's going to mush all together. So it's a way to keep areas clean, and it's also a way to create highlights and cool little patterns like that. Okay, so another kind of way to mask is a resist. So a crayon resist is kind of what it sounds like. You're going to draw with a crayon, which is, waxy. And then when you paint over the top, it's going to resist the paint, and it makes a really cool looking kind of technique. So this is kind of like a red-orange, and then I paint blue over the top, and you can see it resists. So this is another kind of unique technique that you can use in whatever you're doing. Alright, so I went over a bunch of techniques. There are more techniques than this, so you can Google, YouTube some different techniques as well. But what I want you to do is create a minimum of 9 squares or spaces on a watercolor page and create a sampler of different techniques. So like I said, it could be the 9 that I've gone over, or it could be you could research and find some more, maybe that I haven't shown you. And then you can use a different technique like masking or blotting more than once with different materials. So you can have a blot that's tissue paper, you can have a blot that's plastic wrap. So that will count as a different technique, a blot with sponge. So just get started, and then I have a bunch of examples in class. You can Google other examples, and I just want you to practice using watercolor, trying to figure out how it works, how you like to use it, before we start our next project, which will be watercolor painting. So if you have any questions in class, ask. Good job.